One, two, three, four.
You are listening to SKYLIT, the SKYLIT Books podcast. SKYLIT Books is a general interest bookstore in the Los Feliz neighborhood in Los Angeles. You can shop with us from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. or visit us online 24/7 at skylitbooks.com. Follow along at SKYLIT Books Instagram and Twitter. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening, and now on to the episode.
Hello, my lovely listeners, and welcome to SKYLIT. This is a SKYLIT Books podcast, and I'm your host, Lance Morgan. Today, I'm so thrilled to welcome Dr. Robin J. Hayes to read from her new book, Love for Liberation, African Independence, Black Power in a Diaspora Underground, followed by a conversation with both of us after. Dr. Robin J. Hayes attended St. George's, an elite New England boarding school, and studied at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. After graduating, she collaborated with veterans, clergy, and soccer moms to lead dozens of humanitarian aid caravans to Latin America. Later, she studied at the Sorbonne and Yale University, where she earned a PhD in political science and African American studies. As a professor at Williams, Northwestern, and other prestigious colleges and universities, Robin wrote, produced, and directed the award-winning documentary Black in Cuba, which is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. She's published essays in The Atlantic and received funding for her work from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Ford Foundation. Robin's currently a staff writer on a forthcoming television series from the producers of Transformers, The Shield, and Devils. A surfing and contemporary art enthusiast, Robin lives in Santa Monica. Robin, I'm so happy to have you on. I'm so excited for this episode.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a longtime fan of SKYLIT Books, and so it's lovely.
For all the listeners, I want you to know we're already fast friends. We've already had a full conversation beforehand, and so we were like, wait, we should stop and let you guys be involved in this. So I just want you to know to be so excited for this episode, and I'm already excited for our conversation. But before that, Robin, you have a reading to share with us?
Yes, I do. This is my first public reading of a book I've written. This is my first book, so forgive any nerves and trespasses, but yes, I will be reading from, it's a narrative history book, so there's no spoilers in history. We all know how it turns out.
Right.
So I'll be reading a little bit from the conclusion, which gets into the legacy of African independence and Black power on the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think that would be a great springboard for our discussion today. So this is from a section in the epilogue called Footsteps. Although African independence and Black power weren't able to fully actualize their goal of complete self-determination, today's generation of social justice activists appear to be taking cues from their limitations and the best of their examples. The Black Lives Matter movement, or BLM, was founded in 2013 by 3 openly queer Black women activists, Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza, and Patrice Kahn Colors. It began with a hashtag, Black Lives Matter, and helped coalesce online discussions about the acquittal of white Latino George Zimmerman in the killing of unarmed teenager Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida. The still controversial assertion, for some, that Black Lives Matter and the millions of social media impressions the term and hashtag have made articulate the frustrations of an entire generation about the continued but often denied reality of racial injustice. A misleading discourse about America being post-racial had enabled liberal indifference to anti-Black police misconduct. School-to-prison pipelines have been enacted and well-funded in segregated public schools while teachers struggle to acquire basic supplies for their classrooms from their meager wages. Microaggressions in workplaces, the healthcare system, and public space remain facts of Black life in spite of the concessions won by the social movements for civil rights, Black power, and African independence. BLM has helped the US and other nations understand that in spite of elites supporting a Black president, Barack Obama, whose father was an African independence activist, or welcoming a Black duchess, such as Meghan Markle, or declaring a society colorblind, which is what's happened in France, white supremacist policies and practices continue to restrict the life chances and choices of Black people throughout the world. In this Black Lives Matter cycle of contention, there is already evidence that the movement has sought transnational connections due to their frustrations with domestic elites. These frustrations exploded in 2014 during the supportive international response to the rebellion that followed the police killing of unarmed teenager Mike Brown. That rebellion was known as the Ferguson Uprising. Out of this uprising came a number of national demands, including, quote, the demilitarization of local law enforcement across the country, repurposing of law enforcement funds to support community-based alternatives to incarceration, end quote, and the development, legislation, and enactment of a national plan of action for racial justice by the current presidential administration. In spite of the cascade of support enjoyed by the movement and expressed vigorously via social media, federal, state, and local authorities made little or no progress toward these demands. So, following the examples of the Organization of African American Unity, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Black Panther Party, and African independence movements, BLM participants appealed to the United Nations for international intervention in 2016. Testifying before the UN, co-founder Opal Tometi asserted, in the footsteps of many courageous civil and human rights defenders that came before, I look to this meeting to be a forum for meaningful dialogue and action. Indigenous press institutions and the Black Lives Matter hashtag also enabled activists to engage across national borders. BLM chapters have emerged in Marseille, Brussels, Johannesburg, London, Birmingham, Berlin, Amsterdam, and other international cities in response to racially motivated violence and police shootings, which are international in scope. It appears this new cycle of contention reflects the patterns of migration from Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean to Europe, Canada, and the US that occurred in the late 20th century. Black power and African independence developed connections based on an understanding of the impact of the transatlantic slave trade on people of African descent born in the US. However, Black Lives Matter activists are frequently first or second generation descendants of Black immigrants who have homeland relationships to Europe, the Caribbean, and/or Africa. BLM also embraces the diasporic intersectional approach to achieving racial justice that Black power and African independence began to develop, but did not quite embody. Protest chants and social media posts in support of BLM have also exclaimed, Black trans lives matter, Black women's lives matter, Black immigrant lives matter, and Black queer lives matter. They've done this to indicate how the movement's understanding of Blackness embraces its more vulnerable members. Con Colors explained, we aren't going to give up parts of our community in an effort to save some of our community. It's either all of us or none of us. The emergence of Black Lives Matter as a transnational intersectional movement suggests that another diaspora underground is in the making. In 2020, another wave of protests erupted throughout the US and internationally in response to the police murders of unarmed George Floyd in Minneapolis, unarmed Elijah McClain in Aurora, Colorado, and unarmed sleeping Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. The gruesome reality of white supremacist violence against protesters from all backgrounds, as well as towards victims of police misconduct, this violence often captured on digital video and disseminated instantly via the internet, also spurred more difficult and productive dialogues about the continued realities of anti-Black racism at school, at work, in interpersonal relationships, and in the healthcare system. More than ever, dominant institutions ranging from Netflix to Ben & Jerry's have directly proclaimed Black Lives Matter. Among white communities, candid conversations and trainings about white privilege, white fragility, and the best practices of allyship are increasingly popular online and in person. However, BLM activists continue to experience the discrediting, violence, false arrests, and efforts at co-optation experienced by African independence and Black power. Some community members question whether protesting or voting are worth it. Understanding that this new diaspora underground is one of many, which were created by the total commitment and profound sacrifice of people who came before us, daunts some of us into believing change is not possible. It's fair for young people who are newly woke and those of us who have long been aware of the disappointments, incarceration, exile, and assassinations that often greet racial justice activists to be skeptical. How do we know that a diaspora underground is anything more than an adventurous loop that traps Black people in the vain hope that white supremacy can end? Along with sit-ins, now referred to as occupations, and mass demonstrations, a popular action during the era of Black independence and Black power that has made a comeback during this BLM cycle of contention is the raised fist. While this act of solidarity by racial justice activists was and continues to be distorted by the mainstream media as aggressive or defiant, in fact, the raised fist, sometimes covered in a Black glove, is and always has been a form of salute. A salute to everyday Black people throughout the African diaspora who must use their resourcefulness, wit, and grace to survive against the overwhelming odds created by white supremacist policies and practices. A salute to ancestors like Ali Lapointe, Patrice Lumumba, the 4 little girls in Birmingham, Alabama, and Malcolm X, who gave their lives in the past so that today's struggle is possible. A salute to those who remain in exile, in prison, or on the ground as Indigenous leaders, the folks who, according to SNCC facilitator Ella Baker, work on a regular base outside of the limelight to cohere and uplift their communities. A salute to the miraculous diasporic splendor of Black culture and the ways in which it helps us find joy, community, and self-love in spite of white supremacist violence. The salute remains a powerful and unifying act because Black suffering and excellence are so often made invisible by the negligence and hostility of dominant institutions. In researching this book, I have been fortunate enough to walk in the footsteps of African independence and Black power activists. I visited archival collections and had the opportunity to interview dozens of survivors throughout the US, Ghana, South Africa, and Zambia. Immersing myself in their legacy and witnessing its direct impact on anti-racist activism today has cured me of my skepticism and alerted me to my responsibility. Diaspora Underground's ability to facilitate innovations in social movement ideas and tactics, exchanges between activists in emancipated spaces, and sustained transnational engagement from which new cycles of contention can emerge is not solely reliant on the work of social movement activists. It also requires support from committed Indigenous institutions and constituencies. The force of anti-racist activism is not a mystical giant in the hillside over which we, everyday community members and allies, have no control. On the contrary, the foundation for observable social change that a diaspora underground creates demands our cognitive liberation. Cognitive liberation is the faith that a better world, I will start that again, demands our cognitive liberation. Cognitive liberation is the faith that a better world is what we deserve, possible, and on her way. It also requires our willingness to use concrete action as an indicator of that faith. Kwame Ture, who's also known as Stokely Carmichael, his call for Black power was so powerful because of the crowd's response on that warm night in Mississippi and the responses of so many crowds afterwards. It was also amplified by the willingness of the Black press and historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs such as Howard and Spelman, to help clarify the meaning of this message, although it was distorted by dominant institutions. Similarly, today, the success of Black Lives Matter in making our dominant institutions more inclusive and less violent, a change that positively impacts everyone, will depend on all of us. So, dear readers and listeners, I conclude by asking you to consider how you can salute the Black radical tradition and help construct this new diaspora underground. In addition to raising your fists to see and be seen, are you willing to show up at mass demonstrations and help register voters? You're willing to fill out yet another digital petition and email a representative or police chief? Are you willing to support Black studies, curricula in schools, the scholarship funds of HBCUs and Black-owned media, to participate in and help construct emancipated spaces, to become an Indigenous leader against racism on your block, in your house of worship, or in your social circle? Only concrete action can buoy our faith in the possibility of change. The freedom, connections, and visibility that the African diaspora enjoys today is proof that organizing works if we work it.
Wow. Powerful conclusion to a wonderful book. And how are you?
I'm okay. You know, I'm the more peaceful and joyful I am, the more I am a crier.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I think there's just, something is happening to me in midlife where I just feel so much more open to my emotions. And so when I'm moved by something, the tears just come, but I am okay.
Do you think that it's peace? It's like some sort of like inner peace and hope, or
yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's amazing. I'm happy for you that you can, access those emotions, but also like, you feel that movement to, just be so free in how you feel. And that's, I mean, for Black people, that is huge. And I mean, some may say it's a new construct for a lot of Black people to be able to be open to express their emotions, because a lot of history has stopped us from doing that. But
I was raised, and I talk about her in the book. I was raised in part by my grandmother, who grew up in the Jim Crow South during the Depression, and she was hardcore, tough as nails, and she definitely was, she and my grandfather raised us to be, you've got to be tough. You take your licks and you keep going. You persevere no matter what. And I understand that that was advice that came from love, and it's advice that many of us get. So I understand that my grandparents gave me that advice to be tough and persevere at all costs out of love. And that was partially how they were able to help me take advantage of opportunities that they didn't have, And so I understand it, but also, that is not advice that you can live by. We can't live hard on defense, on guard, to paraphrase Anita Baker, 365. Yeah, so I found, we can't live on guard with our defenses up 365 days of a year. It's too, it's not sustainable. And, there's a reason that many of us in our Black communities struggle with chronic stress-related illnesses, because we are not only subjected to additional stress, but also we are often conditioned in our cultures that we're not allowed to take care of ourselves, that we're not allowed to feel sad, that we're not allowed to experience grief. And we go from, one thing to the next, fighting. And so I found that, I still have my willfulness to persevere. I still have my strength, but I also feel free to detach with love from people and environments that don't share my values. I don't feel like I need to change everyone to help, and I'm just helping. I'm just one of many to help build the world that we need. And I found that has allowed me to be much more open to all of my emotional experience, and to be more compassionate and caring towards others too.
And I mean, that's the future, I think, for a lot of just the future for a lot of younger Black people like us, to like, be able to access our emotions and be, because I feel like, and correct me if you disagree and I'm wrong, but a lot of being emotional and being able to be openly emotional was this like thing only available to white people because we had to relearn how to be emotional because of like just the tortured past of Black people and how we had to hide it for fear and for fear and for our own safety. And now it's like it has to be relearned, where white people didn't have to have that stress and have that fear like we did. But like, and now that it's happening, people, especially white people, are like, oh, they don't understand that. They don't understand how we weren't able to do that. And there's been a lot of, I mean, growing up, I've had a lot of people in my life be like, oh, why do you act like this? Why are you acting so like removed from things? And were you raised to not be like able to express how you feel and all these things? So I feel like, just us being able to even have this discussion about this is just so monumental. And I feel like a lot of non-Black and non-people of color need to understand that as well. Understand that we are, because of white oppression, we are at a disadvantage there. So we need to like, it needs to be noted and, treated.
Your perspective on this is so interesting because I think it's two distinct but related things at play. I think one, white settler colonial culture is also a culture in which feelings are policed, in which people are not allowed full authentic self-expression, right? That, it's very much a discipline and punish type of culture where everyone is measuring themselves based on their ability to dominate and control others and nature, right? So, I mean, this is the culture that gives us a definition of masculinity that is about being predatory, being, being hostile, being able to be violent against other men, and women, and the environment, and so that is not a culture in which care and compassion has been truly valued, although we have so many representations in mainstream film and television of white saviors, of the ideal family. But I think for me, growing up outside of that, once I went to boarding school and I started to be, have friends, with white families, I began to see like, oh no, that is not how white people are living either, right? Like there is a lot of abuse, there is a lot of self-abuse, there is a lot of addiction in these homes too, in the nicest homes, right? And so I think so there's that challenge that our mainstream culture has not been caring of mental health. Our mainstream culture is not caring and compassionate, yet pretends to be. And that can be very confusing. And then at the same time, as Black people, we are subjected to so much trauma because of white supremacist violence that it's difficult to get out of crisis mode to even have the space to process. And I think, we have our, spiritual practice, we have our cultural practice. And I think that has been the space for feelings, right? Not so much, always like an interpersonal conversation, right? But definitely our culture, from, before the Emancipation Proclamation has a strong expressive quality to it, and also an interactive quality, and also has been a space where we have voiced our desire for healing, our desire for closeness, our desire for change. So I think it's there, but we just don't necessarily, like, we feel more comfortable in church, or we feel more comfortable, dancing in the basement to records,
Exactly.
dating. But yeah, it's different. But I think it's something to me that I think is very exciting now and helpful now, is that we're taking a critical eye to how whiteness has been represented, and understanding that has been gaslighting even white people, right? In terms of their own lived experience and reality.
And to touch on one thing before, I feel we should talk about your book. I really want to talk about the book too, which I feel like this feeds into that as well. But the last thing I want to talk about this, because you talk about the connection with like this idea of expressing yourself through church. I feel like there's a movement though where a lot of younger Black people are moving away from the church, because especially young queer people, and as queerness becomes more of a anti-queerness becomes more talked about in the Black community, when a lot of it is rooted in the church, but also rooted in colonialism and slavery. But like, how do you see the younger Black people moving away from church as like a kind of a commentary on how church has not been an accepted place for every Black person, and kind of I feel like that becoming this new way for Black people especially to say, oh, I don't need church to be the only way I can express myself. I can do that through I can find that spaces, especially now that we're connected online, and we are connected through like online spaces, but also in-person spaces, and being connected to the community and having Black communities outside of the church. How do you think that's something that like should be also talked about in an expressive way, or the evolution of like open Black expression?
I think that there are the different denominations and churches and clergy that make up the literal institution of the Black church.
Right.
And then there is, the theology and scholarship and oratory and music that maybe started in Black church that has permeated African American life.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I think, when I talk about the church, I'm talking about both, which is confusing, right? But I think it's important to talk about both. And to your point of, yes, as culturally, we are understanding, understanding that homophobia is not productive to Black liberation. It's counterproductive to Black liberation. And this is something that in my book, I talk about how Huey Newton, acknowledged in the early 70s that homophobia is not only, not helpful to Black liberation, it's a reflection of insecurity about Black masculinity, nothing more, nothing less. And he talked about how he had gone through that and he had to check himself, So I think as we see that more in mainstream Black culture, we see, less of a tolerance for, the mitigated acceptance that some Black churches were only willing to offer. So lots of churches were willing to have the choir director, as long as a very talented choir director, as long as the choir director didn't talk about, that his roommate was not a roommate, but a life partner, right? So there was a lot of that. And so now younger people have less of a tolerance for that mitigated acceptance where, you want what I have to contribute, but you're not willing to accept all of me. And I think that's very healthy. But also there's a movement in the Black church of affirming churches, which does not, in my opinion, get enough attention. And there's a great documentary by a Black lesbian filmmaker named Yoruba Richin called The New Black, which talks about the affirming movement in the Black church and how there are Black churches that are welcoming and affirming of LGBTQ folk, and even some that have LGBTQ leadership. And so I just bring that up because I think oftentimes we can feel like, if we grow up in a faith and then we come out, that our spiritual life is over, right? In that sense, our religious life is over. And increasingly that is not so. So there are affirming churches, there are actual churches, but I think also we see going back to disco, right? So
Right.
much of church music, gospel music, of course, it's influenced rock and roll and American popular music at large,
Yeah.
but in queer culture in particular. I mean, when you listen to Sylvester, that falsetto is from church. Like there is no
Yeah.
question. When you listen to Prince, like there is so much. So I think that Prince being, not identifying as queer himself, but certainly a queer non-binary icon. Okay.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
so I think that it's just two separate pieces. And I think to your point, we do see more of the younger LGBT community feeling free to embrace the culture, but not willing to tolerate homophobia and transphobia from the institutions. And that I think is important progress, because if we set boundaries, then, that makes a statement. We may not change the institutions as much as we hope, but we certainly are telling ourselves how we want to be treated.
And
right? And on an individual level, on the community level.
Yeah, it's just so funny that you said Black. You talked a little bit about the choir directors and how like a lot of them are closeted in the church, but it's tolerated because they don't talk about it. Because a lot of me and my Black queer musician friends are like, yeah, in another life we would have been we would have been the church choir director. We would have been there directing the music in our like colorful suits every week, just
And the thing is I mean, other folks, especially queer theory scholars, have talked about this. Even our understanding of what it means to be closeted is so complicated, because people can know, right? It's a sort of willful ignorance, right? Like, don't take away my plausible deniability, right? So it's like, yes, a brother can be stepping through, I'm the choir director, I have on my eyeliner, I'm in my colorful suit, I have my so-called roommate, right? And everyone can know. But if he were to say, I'm going to the gay pride parade, right? My man is getting on my nerves, right? If he were to make it explicit, then it becomes a problem.
Oh yeah.
Right. And everyone knows. And I think that can be even more painful than just straight up being in the closet and hiding, because it's like you're here, but no one is willing to fully see you.
Exactly.
And I think that young people rejecting that is a very powerful, I find it very empowering, for sure.
No, I mean, it's seeing that has just been like, it's in like, while also embracing that a lot of them, even if it was traumatic past for them, they're still like, this was a part of me for the longest time. There was just recently a Twitter trend of like, what was your favorite gospel song? And Black people were like, this was mine growing up. Being like, the music was amazing. Like, you can't, I always tell my friends, I'm like, if you want to hear real good music, go to Black church. The best musicians you've heard in your life that are like famous pop singers can't touch a Black choir soloist. Can't touch them. But I want to move away from this and talk more about your book. I want to talk about it because wow, what an amazing book you have written. One thing about your book that really, really, really resonated with me is talking about Black liberation I feel like it became a westernized, is that the right word? I think that's
it's a word.
It's a word. I'm going to use it. A westernized focus, where it's always been talking about it in a capitalistic way, where I feel like your book does comment on the capitalistic nature of it, but also talks about it in an international and like community way of like how community exists, which I feel like Western culture does not really rely on community, but it relies on capitalism, which is inherently like a independent. We have to care about ourselves before we can care about the community. But I feel like your book shows a counterpoint to that, and how in history it's been proven that Black liberation has to start with us caring about something bigger than ourselves and bigger than our country and bigger than our own like immediate family. It talks about that, and I want to hear how you came about that, and really like why you made that like a huge focus in your book.
Well, I think I was definitely inspired by the scope
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, the African diaspora. So
Mm-hmm.
for people who are listening who don't know, any diaspora is, you know, basically a community that has been dispersed over across countries over time. So we have Irish diaspora, Jewish diaspora, African diaspora. The African diaspora in particular is pretty much dispersed because of the transatlantic slave trade and then subsequent forms of migration. So some people were brought, you know, from West Africa to the Caribbean and then later immigrated to New York or London, you know, or Toronto, right? And so that is the Caribbean diaspora is a subset of the African diaspora. So, so when we talk about Black people, you know, we're talking about descendants of people who were brought here enslaved to the United States, but we're also talking about people who, you know, like live in South Africa, live in Ghana. Also, you know, Michaela Cole is English, you know, like we have all different types of ethnicities and nationalities, language, cultural practices. And so the scope of the African diaspora has really helped me understand the diverse nature of my personal Blackness. I am African American, I'm Afro-Caribbean, I'm Afro-Latinx, and I am queer. And for a long time, I felt like I had to suppress, you know, or put on different faces to my Blackness depending on the audience. And understanding that not only, you know, we are so many things as Black people, but also that when we integrate, when we work together, when we collaborate, that is when we have the most force in terms of improving our communities and improving our own lives. So so that was what kind of inspired me to think about, you know, what are the ways, what motivates us, right, to exchange across national boundaries, and how and how is that effective? How is that helpful?
Right. And I mean, as a myself, product of the diaspora, both my parents are Jamaican. They did they went to New York and they moved from there to Connecticut. And like, it's just so, and as a, like, I mean, I'm raised in a fully Jamaican household by my parents, my grandparents lived with us. It just like, I had to, it felt like sacrificing each time. And I feel like there's a hurt that comes with that too. Cause I'm like, I am Jamaican, but also am Black. Like whenever I always think about standardized testing where like, there's no Jamaican American thing I can cross off in there when they're asking for my ethnicity. It's I'm African American, but where's my Caribbean background in this? Where is this? Where do I had to sacrifice it, even checking that little box. And it's just like, it hurts. It hurts having to like organize everything. And as an adult, I made it a big mission of mine to like, you know, say I am all of these things. I am 100% all of, like, I can't separate them. It's not separate for me. I am not 80 people. I'm one person. So it has to.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think absolutely you can't separate them, and there's nothing to be gained from separating them.
Exactly.
Right? Like that's the thing. Like actually, in allowing ourselves to be all of who we are and allowing each other, right, to be all of who we are, then there's so much that we can learn from each other. There's so much that we can come together and produce. And that is really something that comes through, I hope, in the book, is that, you know, African independence and Black power, when these activists began, was, you know, they both were so impactful independently, but when these activists began to make connections and start exchanging ideas and tactics, that's when their scope and their understanding of the possibility for liberation, for Black liberation, for everyone really changed and grew and improved. And so, you know, I think there's a sense sometimes in the United States that, you know, we're in ethnic competition with each other, right? And it's like if a person whose family is from Jamaica says to an African American, I'm Jamaican, it's like, oh, so you don't want to be Black, you want to be a special kind of Black. It's this attitude of defensiveness, right? And same with our African siblings, when people are like, no, but I'm not, like, I'm African American, but African American, and I'm of African descent, and I live in America, but my people did not come here in chains to the South. Oh, well, you think you're so special? No, right? It's just facts. I'm just stating facts. We have our own struggles with things in Africa that I'd love to talk to you about, and so we have our own things or perspective on race in Jamaica. I'd love to talk to you about. Once we get into the space where we can actually focus more on how we can coalesce, how we can build coalitions, I think that is, a great source of power that we can tap into. And they were on the verge of that, African independence and Black power. But then, the counterinsurgency was too great for them to overcome, to fully realize to really kind of take what they were learning from each other and put it into action.
And a book like yours, I think, is a perfect text for one showing how it's been something that has been a priority for just Black culture, and how it also it got pushed aside for to be I feel like I've had this conversation before in the terms of how we put things into boxes. We love as a society put things into boxes because it helps white oppression. It helps white oppression for us to be separated, first to Black people to separate themselves in terms of community like this. And it even hurts white people don't realize too, it hurts them. It takes away their own cultural identities too. And it makes everything, because if everything's separate, white oppression can thrive. Versus if we all band together, we are a powerful force, right? And I feel like a book like yours shows how we need to band together and make each other stronger in that way. And I want to make sure do you agree with that? Do you think that that's something that you set out to do with your book?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It was something that, I was first inspired to think of, to learn more about this relationship between African independence and Black power. And I saw a great documentary I highly recommend called When We Were Kings, about Muhammad Ali and the Rumble in the Jungle, which was, a heavyweight boxing match between him and George Foreman in Zaire. And of course, he's a Black power icon, Muhammad Ali, and was at the time. And he was so moved and inspired by the Congolese people and how much they supported him, because he had stood up to American imperialism. And, I don't think he understood fully the backstory of how they were living under this oppressive regime, because the American government had basically undermined their independence and played a role in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, their democratically elected leader, which I get into in the book. But I was so inspired by his experience. I was like, what caused this time and what happened to this time? Yes. What happened to this time when we were so self-loving and so committed to our communities and figuring out how we could coalesce. And of course, I learned, and I talk about in the book, it wasn't as idealistic as it seems in that film, right? It wasn't quite that peaceful, or as it seems in the footage and stuff that we see. There were a lot of conflicts. There were a lot of misunderstandings. There was a lot that needed to be overcome. But at the same time, the self-love came from the commitment to struggle. And also the belief by these young people that change was going to happen tomorrow. So many of the activists I interviewed, so many of the memoirs and things I've read, people were very clear, we really believed that the revolution was going to happen any day now. And we were fighting for that to be true. And so, yeah.
And I feel like there's such a parallel to that in what happened last year, where to see this worldwide kind of movement happen, or even in some ways this worldwide statement for so long. Countless marches around the world, countless conversations happening, just felt so powerful, so powerful. But then like I feel like a lot of us are like, yeah, things are going to change now, things are different now. And I mean, I don't think that it happened to the extent we all thought it would. And so I feel like, it's in a way history repeating itself, of us having to, like, I don't know, be okay, learn what it means that things didn't change the way we thought it would. You know what I mean?
Well, things not changing the way that we thought it would is not things not changing at all.
No, that's fully true. Yeah.
And I, of course, I understand the frustration because, now we have the UN, Declaration of Human Rights. We have many anti-discrimination laws in place. It can feel very frustrating and silly to be demanding what should already be, right? Technically, it is illegal to kill an unarmed person who's committing no crime. That's already been handled, right? To quote the great Olivia Pope from Scandal, right? So, so on one hand, that's technically already been handled, but yet we see the video, we see what continues to happen. And so it can be so frustrating, but I think it's very important to track and stay focused on the changes that are being made. Power yields nothing without pressure, and so, yes, the pace is frustrating. There's no question. I would not argue that. But, there is a clear sense, I think, by elites that, especially now when we live in the most transparent time ever, we live in the most transparent time ever, that there is a sense that elites must be accountable to the masses. And, is that accountability what it should be? I would argue no. Is that, but that is a big shift from 20 years ago. When, again, to quote the great Lin-Manuel Miranda in Hamilton, like there were rooms where it happened and people felt very secure that no one would know what went on in those rooms.
Yeah.
Right. And that they were isolated from the impact and how the masses felt about what happened in those rooms. Now people know it will be on Twitter.
Yep.
It will be on Instagram, right? You are not allowed to just make a decision. People will not just go along with it or grumble quietly. That day is over, and that changes a lot. So, certainly, again, when I talked to surviving activists, in Black Power and African independence, it was very clear. Yes, they did not get as far as they hoped. The Black Panther Party, the 10-point platform. I mean, these are all still very reasonable demands today. We want housing. We're still, Oakland in particular is having a tremendous unhoused and unaffordable housing crisis. They did not get as far as they hoped to go, but there is no question that they did get somewhere. And that is a value that sets the stage for the baton to be passed for other people who can keep moving. Right.
And that's, God, that's the dream. That's the dream.
I think that's very much what we see happening now. But in my conclusion, there's no question that we see that now, where the baton is passed and people are continuing to go and they're learning from the pros and cons, and that's all we can do. That's all we can do. But we have to keep going.
It's amazing. Honestly, and it's amazing to see like young people, teenagers are using platforms that they're on to like talk about it, to like hold people accountable for things, to hold like not even just politicians, but like celebrities, to hold writers, activists accountable for what they're saying, for what they're doing, for where they're lacking and where they're compromised and corrupt, and like saying this is wrong. Like the TikTok of it all. Oh my God.
the TikTok of it all. And the TikTok of it all, and how it's not, yes, they're holding individuals accountable, but I think perhaps more transformatively, they're holding institutions accountable. Yes. Right? In terms of how are you using your resources? Why are you using your resources in this way?
And in a way that I think when maybe I'm pitching for your book to be instead of an audiobook, a TikTok book.
That is what I mean. That is, you may have said a word. I may have to credit you, because I think, that's the thing, is I think there's definitely awesome stuff that can happen.
Yeah.
Probably most importantly, a sense that you are not alone, and that you're part of a community voice that you have easy access to. Because I think that is also part of what's transformative, is that when people feel confused or they feel upset or they feel hurt, I mean, that kid who just posted a video of his teacher, his math teacher, and this very, very, very racist, I don't even want to say performance of indigenous culture, because it was just a complete minstrel show in a math class. He filmed it, and I have had not dissimilar experiences as a student before social media times, and I thought it was me, right? And that's you can film that and say, I think I felt like this was violent, and everyone can be like, because it was. That's what that was. You don't know. We're looking at it. You are not crazy. It's not you. And I think that is very, very important to our well-being, that we're able to not be gaslit so easily, and to understand that we're not alone, even if we're the only people in the room at the time, in the school, in the neighborhood. We're not alone in life. And I just think that that's something that's so empowering and important right now.
Yeah, and just educational too. One thing I love about it too is people are giving supporting evidence, giving historical background, giving all these things that are like, oh my God, like I've never seen like, other than like scholarly texts and like things like that, I've never seen a platform being used like this, a media platform where like I'm like watching TikToks like, oh my God, that's it. That's how this came about. Or, oh my God, they're talking about like this specific topic that I feel like no one has known about before, but now it's like, and
they're also amazing. Filling the gap. Unfortunately, there's still a gap between what you can see on TikTok and what is being taught in schools, and that may be worsening as this conservative campaign against critical race theory and ethnic studies, African American studies continues. So the popular education aspect of it, I think, is more critical than ever.
Yes. Wow, I think we just pitched Love for Liberation as a TikTok series.
TikTok series is like, I mean, I love it.
Love it.
But I respect content creators and how hard they work. I feel like there's this kind of misunderstanding about how much effort it takes to be an artist of any kind, but I think to be an influencer, the amount of work you have to do. It's writing, performing, and producing, and it's just short form, extremely short form in the TikTok sense. But it is hard work, and so I have so much respect for the people who are doing that for social justice and equality. I think
it's so amazing to see. We are running out of time, sadly, so I have two more things I want to talk about. Sure. The first thing I want to talk about is queerness in your book, because I feel like, especially, we're seeing this conversation happening right now with Netflix, and where there's this conversation about queerness, transness, like all of this gender queerness being seen as a separate thing from Blackness. I didn't want to I'm talking about the Dave Chappelle stand-up sketch, where it like a lot of the stuff it feels like the Black Lives Matter movement and civil rights movement, it's seeing as something separate from queerness, but like Black queerness has always existed. It's been something. There has been, where with Black liberation, there has to be queer liberation. And I feel like you talk about it you talk about in your book, about like all these leaders who were also queer people who did a lot for just the movement, who are not as talked about and not as seen. We were talking about for the podcast, how James Baldwin is a new conversation people are having, is a new who's been around forever. I mean, forever,
Well,
but like, been around for so long.
Yeah, two figures that I talk about at length in the book are James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin. And I think that people don't necessarily think about them as Black Power activists because they're more associated with the Civil Rights Movement.
Yes.
And their collaborations with Martin Luther King. And there's a famous photograph of them, working on organizing the March on Washington together. And they're both gay Black men. And so we're both Black gay men. And so known to be Black gay men during the time, right? It's not a surprise. And so, so I think they were definitely marginalized from visibility in the movement to a certain extent because of their sexuality. And, so much of the strategy at the time, especially with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, was to, perform a deservedness of equality, right? So, when we see footage of the sit-in movement, for example, to desegregate public facilities in the South, there was a dress code, and the women were told you need to wear knee-length skirt and proper shoe, and your hair needs to be a certain way, and men, you need to be wearing suit and ties. Like, their appearance was not an accident, right? It was all to show that we are trying to do something very simple, which is just to be human in public space and treated equally. And this is the response we get. So it was to show the relief of the white supremacist hostility towards them versus them just trying to study for school or read the Bible or whatever it was.
Right.
And so because it was a much more homophobic time, even though some people might still have these ideas, a queer person could not be part of that performance of deservedness in the same way. That was the wisdom of the time. So they were marginalized because of their sexuality, but their contributions were also marginalized because they didn't play the traditional, or they didn't play, I don't want to say traditional, they didn't play the charismatic leader role. Even though if you see Raoul Peck's I Am Not Your Negro, it's very clear that James Baldwin is hella charismatic, hella, inspiring, and you could just listen to him talk all day, right? So, and a lot of clips of him are going around social media, and young people are learning about him, which I think is amazing. But he's super charismatic, James Baldwin, but he played more of a role as a strategist and a supporter. And so he wasn't at the microphone all the time. He was often behind the scenes. So, for example, there were a series of quote unquote debates between him and Malcolm X at Howard University, but James Baldwin asked Malcolm X to come, and he was like, what we should do? We should have a debate. And so it should just be like, look at us, we're at odds. Meanwhile, they were totally friends and there was no drama, right? So, so if you see just the flyers as an archivist, if you just look at the flyers, the promotional stuff, you think, oh, they are at odds, like James Baldwin, Malcolm X. Like, they're not a part of the same thing, but in fact, they were doing this work to share the ideas and to, recruit more people to get involved and start being activists. So, so I think that their roles as strategists is part of what kept them, sort of hidden figures in movement activism, the history of movement activism. And I'm glad that is changing now, but also definitely homophobia played a part.
And it still today we still see the ramifications of that. But I think that there's, what we were talking about before, the way that we can comment on it, we can hold people accountable, is helping to show why it's not acceptable anymore, and and also like showing that these leaders existed and it's been existed, and there's not there has to be a space for Black queer liberation and Black liberation. There has to be a place for it.
There has to be a place for it. And I would just take it one step further in full agreement with you. There always has been a place for it.
Yes, right.
I think that, obviously transness is not new. Queerness is not new. We have always been contributing to the community. and we have always been contributing to anti-racist activism. So, it must be, and so it has been, and so, the strides that the LGBTQ community has made and the trans community has made, which have not solved the issue, not solved the problem of homophobia, transphobia, not even slightly, but the strides that have been made are of no threat to anything but Black patriarchy, right? And so I think it's important to be clear about that if Huey P. Newton, an icon of Black masculinity, one of the co-founders of the Black Panther Party, was very clear that, that the homophobia that he had, which he renounced, the homophobia that he had was really about his own insecurities about masculinity and his defining manhood as being about suppressing women. And when he was able to question that and let go of that, right, he was able to understand, there's nothing counter-revolutionary about being, in his words, counter-revolutionary about being gay. There's nothing counter-revolutionary about being a woman. There's nothing counter-revolutionary about the feminine, however you would describe. What's counter-revolutionary is this idea that I need to brutalize and dominate to be significant. That's what needs to change. So I think it's very important. Yes, Black queer people, Black trans people, our liberation matters, our lives matter. We are a part of the Black Liberation Project, but also Black male supremacy cannot be.
Yeah.
Black male equality can be. Black men can be, of course. Black masculinity can be. That's not toxic. But Black male oppression is not the answer.
And that's, I mean, wow, I feel like that's a great way to end that question, because it's Black. I want that like tattooed on me. I want that to be like the first thing you see when you see me is that statement. Robin, that's perfect. Because I know I want to get you out of here before your next meeting, but the last thing I want to ask you is the first word in the title of your book is love. It's love. And there is I think a huge place for love in Black liberation. It's in love of community, love of ourselves, love of our neighbors, love of the world. That's a huge thing in Black liberation. And I wanted to like know why love of liberation, one, is the title, but also just so important for you in this book, because I feel the love in it. I feel your love of it. And when you were reading it, I feel like when I saw you get emotional, it was love. It was just love that we all should be in love with this idea of Black liberation. It's love. It's what we saw last summer when people were getting together to do this. It's just that's so important. Can you sorry, I got a little bit emotional saying
yes. I mean, we, to quote the great Lenny Kravitz, like, let's let love rule, like that.
Yes.
And I think, certainly the title was inspired by the activists that I studied for this book and how they were motivated by love, whether it was discovering a love of themselves that they had been deprived of, because they had been in racist schools or racist environments, or discovering a love for their people because they began to see what was truly possible, that the subjection that they had seen surround them was not all that there was, that there could be an alternative. But it's one of the number one distortions about Black liberation movements that somehow we're driven by hate or we're driven by anger or revenge. It's just never really been true. It's either been acts of self-defense or acts of love. And in the case of African independence and Black power, it was clear that love for community and also generally humankind, a love for peace, a love for democracy, a love for justice, that's what drove people to make these sacrifices to create something better. And it's just the most sustainable fuel that we can have in terms of slowly and surely building a more equitable and just society. Like anger, first of all, anger is basically sorrow's security, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, sorrow
Yeah.
security, right? Like we're angry because we don't want to be real about the sadness that we're feeling, about the loss that we've endured, our fear, whatever it is. Starting from a place of love allows us to do that, allows us to hold each other in that as we work to move forward. So Che Guevara said, a true revolutionary gives from feelings of love. He was part of the Cuban Revolution.
Mhm.
And I think that is just most often the case, that the people who are most committed, they are coming from a place of love. And that's something that I've tried to just integrate in my own life, is to lay down the guard, as I was saying before, lay down the defenses and just find my strength in love.
Yes. And I think that's a great way to end this episode, that find your strength in love. Find, that feels like, to go back to earlier thing, that feels like something out here in a gospel song. And I think that's
Yes,
beautiful.
I'm just thinking, like, is that a lyric in The Greatest Love of All? Maybe it is, but it's
probably, but it's amazing. I love, when I thought of that, I was like, find your strength in love. I think that's Whitney. I feel Whitney in this room right now.
May her spirit guide us in everything. May the great Houston, your spirit guide us in all things.
Now I'm gonna go listen to her greatest hits. Robin, and I'm so sad we have to end this, but I'm so happy and grateful to have had this conversation with you. To the listeners, please go buy Robin's book, Love for Liberation, African Independence, Black Power in a Diaspora Underground, right now at SKYLIT Books. It's on display at when the book's released, or not the book's released, sorry, when the episode's released, you could see this book right on our podcast display in the front of the store. Please go buy a copy. It is so worth it. It's a beautiful book. Go learn about this rich and just current history. It's like a history that's affecting us today. Go read about this and, just understand where Black liberation has come from and where it's going. And Robin, do you have any last things you would like to say to our listeners and the book community as a whole?
Well, just keep reading. That's
Yes.
one thing that has been a key part of Black liberation for hundreds of years now. So keep reading, and thank you and SKYLIT Books for just being a beacon of independent and thoughtful discourse, because that's a big part of how we're going to get the world we all need.
Yes. And that's what a great way to end this. No, thank you again, Robin. And thank you to all my wonderful, beautiful listeners. And you all do something nice for yourself today. And know that I love you all. I love you all, because that's the greatest love of all. Another Whitney quote. No, you guys have a great rest of your day. And please come back. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.